guys, my name's Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with Logic Pro. As promised, today I'm starting on compression, although you could probably tell by the title of this video, there's a lot more to compression than meets the eye. So I did want to start in this project actually just because I wanted to touch on something. Last time I said when you go into dither, only dither once. I kind of said that wrong. Normally I just do the mastering on the track. On my master channel strip here. So pop up, hit X here to bring up the mixer, and then I just go onto my master channel strip, which is right here. It says output, and then I just do all my mastering here. So that's normally what I do, which is why I say only dither once. But I kind of corrected with some annotations and some comments, and some notes in the description as well. That's you should only dither once if you're doing it that way. If you're actually outputting it to 24-bit, you still need to dither. Just because your logic works in 32-bit, so when you bounce it bounces down to 24-bit, and it does still need to be dithered. It's not as important as when you bounce from 24 to 16-bit, but it is still kind of important. Okay, so now that might as well just do this here. We have wave, everything that we need, 1 to 25. Actually, 1 to 25 sounds about the length of the project, and we're going to include the audio tail because what the heck. And then no normalization sounds good. And actually, before I bounce, I need to turn off the gain. Let's do this again. Bounce and wave 24. Okay. And it looks like we're ready to go. So I'm just going to bounce this here. Okay. And bounce. Okay. Sweet. So we'll just save that there. Let it bounce. Speedy, speedy, speedy. Sweet. So now we have our track bounced out. I could save this, new project, and we are going to close this project, and then we're going to go, we'll just create an audio track for now, and then we'll drag this into our audio track. Here we go, mastering E. Ooh, actually, first what I should do is I should save this. Okay, I saved it. Sorry for the cut there. Just kind of want to make it easier so I could find where the heck I was saving the other one, and then I could save that there. Okay, so I saved this, and now I could drag this in here, and we should be dandy to start. Contains tempo information. We'll just import. We don't really care because we're mastering. Usually you're not using tempo-related information on the master. Okay, so now we're going to zoom out all the way and bring this up as big as we can get it. Because we're mastering, so it's kind of nice to see everything here. Now, you'll notice this is a rather small section actually, and that's just because I needed a little bit of variety to work with, but I didn't want to go too crazy. So you'll notice that there are two different sections. One is louder than the other, so I kind of did that on purpose. We kind of learned some things. Okay, so now that I have this track in here, I can actually start to master. Whoopee! Everybody says he's finally going to actually start to master. Okay, so, man, if I had a camera here, that would have been funny to watch. Okay. So I said I was going to talk about compression first, and that's easier said than done, mostly because saying I was going to talk about compression sounds really easy because I have one video, just one video on compression on my various intro to mixing videos. I think I only did one that actually covered compression. Now, on the other hand, I'm going to split this into two videos because compression by way of mastering is a whole different monster. Okay, so there's a whole lot of things you could do. Personally, I wouldn't use this too much. Use Logic's built-in compressor just because it's very colored. I did actually use it recently once on a master, but I'm going to kind of show you here because we're familiar with this. Normally, I'd actually swap over to using the plugin that I suggested at the beginning of the series, which is limiter number 6. There we go. Because this has a built-in compressor, limiter, high frequency limiter, clipper, and it also has overload protection, which sometimes does a good job, sometimes it's kind of weird. But anyway, so we'll get into this compressor just so I can kind of show you this. And mastering compressors tend to be a little bit weird sometimes, and they won't have this standard format, and sometimes they'll have like auto gain enabled, and then things get really confusing. So, I think first I want to talk about peak versus RMS compression. I think I mentioned it in my compression video, but it's definitely very important for me to reiterate here what that is. So on my user default, I think I may have changes from the stock one, but if you go to sidechain here, you could see that the detection is peak and RMS. And normally, actually, in previous versions of Logic, you could actually see this somewhere around here. or something like that. I don't remember where the heck they put it in the previous versions, but the detection is peak and RMS. And despite the fact that it's on a sidechain tab, this does actually matter by way of, the whole compressor, even when you're not sidechaining. So peak and RMS, what's the difference? Okay, so let's put it this way. I'm going to go zoom in, show you a little bit of this waveform. We're going to kind of follow this in terms of what it would do by way of mastering. So when you have this track, actually not just in terms of mastering, in terms of whenever you use peak and RMS, what peak does is it uses this little meter. We set the threshold. You kind of see here, we set the threshold. I'm going to turn off the knee so it's kind of a little bit more obvious. But we have this threshold that we set the ratio, and we kind of move that around. You can see that. And what happens, you kind of watch, when we have it on peak, when the audio goes up here, it takes the highest value and it just kind of plugs that into this little inside meter here. So you kind of see it bounces up and then goes down. So it goes straight up to there and it just kind of follows it. And this little meter here also goes up and it follows that as well. So what we're doing is we're following the highest value. Now, in this case, if you're having it do compression, if you actually watch this waveform here, I'm going to turn down the threshold so you kind of see it a bit better. You kind of see it follows it very, very, very close to the opposite of what you have going on. If I could pause that, that'd be dandy. No, it won't pause. But if you kind of look where there's a peak downward. So it's kind of doing the exact opposite waveform for the peak value. So it's just kind of following this, except for reducing it as it goes higher and higher and higher. RMS, on the other hand, is different. If you watch what happens now, we'll switch back to peak. So first of all, you'll notice that it's a lot smoother. And second of all, you'll notice it does a lot less compression. Now this is very, very, extremely, extremely important in terms of mastering, because there are two completely different ways to use a compressor when you're mastering. Actually, I take that back. There's three. So there's the three different ways to use a compressor. I think I might as well pop open the notepad here so we kind of look at this and talk about it. So compressors. We have the three different methods that I was talking about. So two of them utilize peak, one of them utilizes RMS. I think I'll start with the two peak ones because those ones will make the most sense to you just starting out. Hold on a second, actually, let me, okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what we have with the peak, there are two different methods. Let's write this down. Peak and 1 and 2. Sweet. So we have these two different things that we could use peak compression for on a master. The first one is to add punchiness. So what we do is we set the side chain setting here to peak, which is obvious because that's what we're talking about. And then we're going to bring the compression down a bit. Not much though. You just want it to be about that much. You want to do very, very light compression. And the ratio, most of these ratios are going to be rather tight, just because you kind of want it to catch a lot of it. Now, we need to open up the attack. This is very important for mastering. You want to have a very open attack if you want punch. So we can open this up. Now I'm going to do one thing really quick. I'm actually going to add a linear phase EQ and boost the high end, just because this doesn't have enough high end to where you could really tell what's going on. Okay, and I need to loop this as well. So we'll take that there, loop it all the way to the beginning. Sweet. Okay, so we have this compressor here, and I'm going to open up the attack. So it's starting at 0, and I'm going to open it up. So it's not too obvious there, but it kind of opens up the high end of the kick. Now listen. Okay, I'm going to turn on the threshold so it becomes more obvious. Now you can hear it. Listen to the kick. So you see when I open up the attack there, the kick, the click of the kick really shines through. So that's one of the uses here. We use it to add punchiness. So that's what we do with one of the things here using the peak detection. So how you choose what settings is very much up to you. And like I said, I am not a mastering engineer. I just master my own tracks, and that's as good as my tracks are, is as good as I can get it. Some of them are worse than others, but still, you can kind of get a sense of how good my masters are by just listening to my tracks. You can tell really that I'm not amazing at it, but I kind of know a little bit of what I'm doing. So essentially, to add punchiness, you want to have a very, very light compression. Normally, your graph should look something along the lines of, oh, actually, we have the attack set to a little too low. We'll set it to there. That's normally what it should look at. If you look at the graph, it should be a very slight amount. So that doesn't make as huge of a difference as it possibly could, because this track doesn't have a lot of high end. I kind of messed that up, dropped the ball on that one. Next week, I'll try to get a track that's a lot better suited for listening to mastering. I might just grab one of my trance tracks and then rip the master off of it and then remaster it for this. But for now, we're just gonna settle with this because unfortunately I'm short on time, and I have to be somewhere else this weekend, so I have to record the video earlier. But anyway, so we add punchiness, and we just kind of want, basically this is what it should generally look like. You know, you should just have very slight, oh, I turned this off, that's why. You just have very slight compression and a nice open attack to kind of let things go through and let some of the high end go through it and kind of be punchy and crisp. And that's kind of what we're gonna do here. Release is up to you. I suggest turning off auto and kind of working it. Just kind of listen. As you open it up, it'll sound more compressed because it kind of stays there and builds up. And as you bring it up, it sounds a lot crisper. In this case, I would suggest a rather fast release. I'm not entirely, like I said, I'm not really good at mastering, so it's just kind of like my suggestion based on the things I've done. This isn't based on a lot of experience or reading or tips from pros like some of the other things I say. This is one of the things that's just purely based on what I kind of run into. So I suggest generally a faster release if you want to get punchiness. And so now I think it's worth moving on to the next thing. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about here is light limiting. So what we're doing here with light limiting is we are going to do a lot more compression, and we're not going to have an open attack and a short release. So we're going to turn these, the attack is going to be very, very, very fast, and we're going to have the release kind of hang out a little bit more. So what we could do is take this, we probably want to pull down the ratio just a little bit too, because you don't want it to be, if I go into the graph, we don't want it to be like that, because then it's like a limiter. And we don't want to do that in our compressor quite yet, unless we know a good compressor for limiting. I don't have any off the top of my head that I would suggest for limiting, but most of the time I get a dedicated limiter to do my limiting. But you can do some light limiting. This will pull up the loudness of your track a little bit, and it allows you to kind of, you know, just do some light limiting and then do some heavier limiting. And since it's using different types of tools, it'll actually, it won't like, they won't sit on top of each other and just kind of cause distortion. I'll talk about that in just a second here, because that's a very important point that is worth stopping on. But yeah, you kind of want to have the threshold lower on this one, so you're actually doing a noticeable amount of compression. So probably somewhere like this. You notice that does squash it down quite a bit. Now we could figure out about how much reduction we're doing here. So this is at negative 15. If we turn it off, it bounces up to negative 10. So we could boost it by 5, and then that kind of gives us a good idea of where we'll be at. So if you listen, now if you look at the meter, okay, actually, I'm going to show you another cool tool here. So if we go metering and then multimeter, we have a plethora of meters that we could use here that'll kind of help us for some things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go turn the peak on infinite, because that means it just holds it, I believe. Show me the peaks. There we go. So we're just kind of letting the track run. And if you notice here, this is what it looks like generally across the frequency spectrum when we play this back. And this is our max peak level. And so now what I can do is I could actually turn on this compressor, and you'll see the peak level won't change much, and yet it'll sound a lot louder. So if you listen. That's what mastering does. So you can kind of tell there, it just barely twitched upwards. Let me clear it, and we'll do this again. So that's with it off, and then we turn on the compressor that we're doing some limiting on, and it just brought it up a tiny bit. And yet it sounds a lot louder. So that's what our limiting is going to be doing, and that's a lot about what mastering is. So the idea of mastering is trying to get it as loud as you can while still having a lot of dynamics, and then like without distortion, without too much distortion rather, because you are going to distort it a little bit, but without too much distortion and stuff like that. So now, why would I not suggest hard limiting with the compressor? The reason I don't suggest that is because compressors are typically, they like to flatten the high end. And if you just do a very high, a very high ratio, and then you just kind of let it run, you could pull it up pretty loud by using the gain. So here we go. Where are we at now? It's at negative 10. Now it's at negative 17. So I could pull this up by pull this up by. So I need to turn that down just a little bit. Try that. There we go. Okay, so let me reset this here. This is this one. I turn it on. You'll notice the volume level here didn't go up at all, but the loudness went up a lot. Why don't I suggest doing this though? Compressors, I've found, especially Logic's compressor, is not suited for this type of limiting. It's a bit the limiting is too hard, and the compression starts to sound bad really fast, and it doesn't really sound all that great. So I don't, like I said, I suggest you could use it for adding punchiness and light limiting, which is when you turn down the ratio, and then you just kind of adjust the threshold so it's doing a good amount, but it's not like squashing it down flat. Because see, that just sounds nasty. Here, let me mute myself really quick. So that's whoa, what happened there? Okay, well, it closed that. Oh wow, that was weird. Okay. So that's kind of, you don't want to get rid of the high end. You just, at this point, we're just kind of flattening the mix a little bit so we can do better things to it later on. Now, the biggest reason you'll do this is because you have different areas of your track have different sort of things. Like, for instance, let's say we didn't have a kick here, and then we brought the kick in later. How do we get both of those to sound loud without having too little compression here? Or too much compression over here? How do we kind of split that up? That's what this initial stage is. Now, that's not adding punchiness. That's with the light limiting. Now, knowing that, we could do RMS. And this is the only one for RMS, so I guess we could actually just put this number 3. And this one is going to be smooth compression. I actually just used this on one of my tracks recently, and it's a pretty cool thing that you might find really useful if you have a lot of dynamic range in your track. And that means if you have sections that are really quiet and you have sections that are really loud, you'll really like this. So we go to the compressor and we turn on RMS. Now what this does, if you watch, actually first we need to turn, because it's not doing much compression, we need to turn that down. But what you'll notice with this one is when we go into compress it, it's not doing, actually we kind of want to smooth out the attack for this too. Let that go out a bit more. There we go. So we have, we could turn up the ratio really high, but the way oh, it's not on loop anymore. That's fine. But the way RMS compression works is because it's kind of taking like a smoothed version of the waveform. It allows us to bring down the compression a lot more without it really affecting the sound as much. So let's see if I can pull this up to where it was. So you see how much compression we're doing. Like before we were doing this much and it sounded terrible. You could actually hear some distortion in the low end when we were doing that much compression with peak compression. Now that we're doing RMS, it's almost like someone's watching this and kind of they're actually moving this kind of up and down like that. And it's slow enough to where you could feasibly do that. And it's not like bouncing around like that, like crazy. It's actually like they're kind of following it like that, slowly behind it. Just kind of looking at, just taking it and being like, oh, instead of watching this like up here and then down here, I'm just going to kind of go like that and just kind of wave up and down just a little bit. So that's the idea behind RMS compression. Now that's not the technicalities behind it, mind you, because it could... it's a RMS stands for root mean square, and don't ask me, but it's math. So essentially what we're doing here is we're taking a very smoothed out and average sort of compression here. So that allows you, if you have like a really quiet break and then you have a really heavy drop with like a distorted kick and it's like a big room drop and everything like that, and everything's just going crazy. And then you have your drop where it's like this very ambient sort of synth pad in the background and stuff like that. Then this is probably what you'll need to do, because you might not be able to pull it up enough to actually get enough, connection there. Or if you have like a kind of a very wide break that's just like very spacious, then you could find that your drop sounds a lot louder than your break, or your drop is distorting but your break sounds fine. That's when you would want to do RMS compression, because it kind of smooths out your mix and kind of just like what it would do if I were to bounce this down is this area would basically be the same height as this area. It's kind of how it does it. So instead of just taking the whole thing and doing something like like that, it actually, what it does instead is it focuses more on kind of like evening things out and kind of smoothing over your mix as a whole. So those are the three types of compression that we're going to talk about with these. Now, obviously, this is a very important case where you want to go through the different types of compressors they have here, because each one has its own tone. Platinum Digital, I'm just going to tell you right now, I like the RMS compression by way of mastering, because I used the Platinum with the RMS and it sounded great on the track that I was doing it, and it actually saved the track in a couple spaces, which is really darn good. But these other ones are probably better suited towards the peak ones. Some of them may be more suited for RMS. I know some of them you don't actually have the option. You have to figure out which it is. Like this one, you could tell this one's peak because of how sharp it is. That one's this one's probably might be RMS, and but they each have their own tone. You'll notice that one sounds drastically different. So that's one thing. Now, if you want to be interesting, you can do this. I don't suggest it. But you can use your compressor, do any one of these, and then enable a form of auto gain. I'll show you what that does here, and I'm actually going to turn down the compression, which means turning up the threshold and turning down the ratio. And we'll set this to peak as well. But anyway, we're just make sure it's open enough so we'll pretend we're doing punchiness. So we'll just kind of set it for punchiness, and then we're gonna turn on this auto gain. I think I probably need to have it at -12 though. Yep. So you'll notice that really brings up the volume level. Watch here. So it basically kind of acts like a gain, and it tries to balance things. So in between here, in between here and the next part, they're not that much different. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to keep the gain. It's trying to automatically like boost the gain. I don't suggest doing that quite yet because there are better tools for doing that, and you'll kind of push into it later. And what I mean by push into it is volume-wise. You'll actually start to push things up. But this is kind of, this is why you want headroom. You'll notice I'm using the compressor here, and it's got a range like right here is -20. So that means if I want to start compression, let me turn off the auto gain really quick here. If I want to start compression, I'm around here with all that headroom that I thought I had before. Let me turn down the gain so you can hear me. But all that headroom we thought we had only translates to right here. So if you have your track hitting at like -5 dB, you're gonna have to be compressing around here, and it doesn't give you a lot of room to work. So when you have headroom, you actually have room to work in this sort of sense. So personally, I suggest starting with either a compressor or an EQ on your master channel strip. That's kind of why I'm talking about compressors first. I'm going to get into EQs later and more detail about that. I kind of want to touch on that one near the end just because that one's got a lot of detail you need to put into it, and there's different ways you could approach. But so these are the types of compression I wanted to talk about today, and I think I've probably spent enough time talking about it. But next week I want to cover multiband compression, which is very key to this because you'll notice that this compressor here has a little bit of a problem. It's checking the entire signal here and compressing based on this entire waveform. It's not actually compressing the high end, the mid-range, and then the low end all separately. So if you have a lot of bass in your track and then you slap one of these on, it's going to be compressing the bass because it's going to be paying attention to that, because that's what's making up most of the level there. It's not the high end, so it can't follow the high end and give you much punchiness. It's just following all the bass. That's where multiband compression comes in, and that's a very important thing. But I kind of just wanted to talk to you guys about these ones. Why do we use a regular compressor for adding punchiness instead of just a multiband compressor? Well, it's kind of stylistic. Do you want it? Do you not want it? And also, there's some there's some plugins out here. There's a really popular one. It's $100. It's called The Glue. It's a very popular compressor plugin for mastering, and it very well describes what we do with these single band compressions for mastering. Not only does it add some punchiness, do some light limiting, smooth compression, but basically it just kind of glues the whole track together. It kind of just like, it takes all the frequencies and just kind of, when it does that compression to it, just kind of helps meld the track together a little bit. So it just kind of unifies the sound and the frequency spectrum just a little bit better. So it just kind of, warms up the track and kind of adds a little bit of body to it and just kind of, glues everything together. So that's why we do that. And we do use single band compression. I'm not saying that multi-band compression is superior because it allows control over all the regions. It's not necessarily true. A mastering engineer would probably use both on a single track. So it is very important to realize that just because one's fancier than the other doesn't mean it's necessarily better. So that's the deal with compressors here. We got the 3 ones. Just keep those in mind: adding punchiness, light limiting, and smooth compression. So this may or may not be useful to you right now, but trust me, later on it will be useful information. If you're just trying to figure out how to do a quick master, when I get into limiters, that's when things will be really easy peasy. You can just slap something on, do a really fast master, and boom, you're done. This, however, is what I suggest starting a master with, so I kind of wanted to touch on it first. And it's one of the things you have to worry more about fine tuning. Limiters are just kind of like pull it up, pull it down. Compressors are a lot more about listening closely for the fine tuning and trying to get it in. So it's going to be a lot more difficult than the other tools in this and in this series. Probably almost as difficult, if not slightly more difficult than EQs in terms of mastering, because you got to be very careful about EQs. And then, but all the other tools are kind of just like, you know, either they're distortion or they're just limiters, which basically all you can do is pull it up and hope for the best. So these ones are the hardest tools, but they are also one of the most important tools because of how much you could change a track using these tools. So very important things to take away from this. I suggest if you've never mastered a track before, on the next one, without too much detail, just kind of go in, add a compressor on top, and just try to do a little bit of nice compression. Just add some punchiness, and then do some smooth compression, and then maybe do some light limiting, and then bounce down your track and normalize it. And that'll be, you know, as your first mastering experience, you could try that. And just you could kind of get more used to the whole idea of compression. This multimeter tool is kind of cool, but trust me, you won't use it as much as some other tools. So so as fancy it is for mastering, it's kind of, you know, I only use it occasionally. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was a helpful video for you guys, and I hope I covered enough detail in some of the things. I know sometimes I skip over some things. I'll say, oh, I'm going to talk about this in a second, then I forget. If I do that, just ask, and I'll comment or add an annotation to the video or something like that, and just kind of give you a heads up, and just kind of, you know, explain the things that I said I was going to explain. But well, yeah, there's I think the one thing that I did kind of want to touch on is that you get the whole bunch of compressors, limiters, different types of things, and you notice when I started to do the really hard limiting with this compressor, it started to sound like all squashed and nasty. That's why we use tons of different compressions. We probably mastering uses more plugins on a channel strip than you might normally use on a regular track if you're not doing like crazy things like distortion, modulation, and stuff like that. But you when you're mastering, you might get like 5-6 plugins on your channel strip rather easily, just because we get like 2 compressors, 2 limiters, and then 2 EQs or something like that. So really we're squashing a lot, but the end result is to hope that it doesn't sound squashed. So that's why we have these different tools, and we just do a different thing using each tool to kind of layer it on top of each other to bring up the loudness, but to not lose the dynamics and the good sound of it. So that's why we use like 2 different compressors and 2 different limiters on the same mastering strip. Because it allows us to do that. If we just get one limiter and try to push as far as we can, then we might hit a point where we're distorting. But if we turn it down and add another limiter on top of it, we can actually pull it up even further, because they're just doing different things and allows it to pull it up a little bit further. So that's the beginning of mastering, you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.